Hey guys, Dave from Nerdarchy, for nerds by nerds, and today I am hanging out with Derek. Is it Derek or Dirk?
That's Dirk.
Dirk, sorry. Uh, from what is it? Faraway Land tabletop RPG game.
Yeah, exactly.
You guys had just recently launched a Kickstarter. You're kicking ass over there, and yeah, one of the things that really drew me to reach out to you was when I saw the art. It's very bright and colorful. Kind of has that like Adventure Time kind of feel to it. I know a lot of gamers are into that. So, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing good, man. And I appreciate you reaching out and then giving me this sort of platform and stuff. That's a nice thing. So I'm very appreciative of that. Thank you.
Oh, you're quite welcome. That's why we do these live chats. It's a way to expose our audience to what's going on in the industry, and we get to talk to cool people, and we get to interact with all the fans. So we always dig it.
Yeah. That's nice, man. I mean, I think I don't know like how like the business world works because I mean, I think a lot of like gamers and game designers aren't business people and creative people. I don't think they're business people. For the most part, like from what I've read, like the history of like TSR and stuff, it was a bunch of dudes that wanted to be like gamers and like made a company and then like they weren't businessmen. So I think that like stuff like this that you guys do is like a big deal because I don't know. I don't feel like I'm in competition with anybody in the gaming market. Maybe if I was like Paizo or like Wizards or something, like it'd be different. But like I don't feel like I have any competition. So.
Well, even talking to some of the larger companies, a lot of them don't feel that way either. You
Hmm.
know, and I've talked to people where they'll be interacting with a fan of their work, and that fan will think that they're complimenting that person by trashing someone else's system or game. And
Yeah.
he's like, "Yo, buddy, like the guy that made that game is my friend. It's a small niche. So everyone knows everyone,
Right.
and most people are friendly within the niche and get along. And I've even the saying rising tides raise all ships couldn't be truer. So I
Yeah.
love seeing it grow. I love the fact that Matt Colville's Kickstarter is at like $1.6 million because I look at that and go, oh well, if I wanted to do a Kickstarter, the roof has just been raised again. So it's awesome.
Yeah. You're totally right, man. I feel the same way. I see no reason for you know, since I was a kid, we were talking earlier about like when I started like playing and stuff, and I mean it was in the early '80s and everything. And when when gaming and stuff becomes like conflictory or a conflict, and there's this animosity and stuff, I kind of step back from that and I do that in social media and I do that in like most areas. When it becomes something that's not fun anymore, I'm kind of done with that because I'm just not interested in dealing with that. Like gaming's supposed to be fun, like making games and playing games and stuff. And I'm not interested in, I don't know, I'm not interested in arguing and having like flame wars and like all of that sort of shit. So,
I totally get that. I mean, we talk about fifth edition Dungeons and Dragons more than anything,
yeah,
and some people are like, "Well, I don't like that for this reason or that reason." I'm like, "Play something else," or they're like, "Help us convince someone else to play this game," and I'm like, "Why?" If they don't want to play it, don't play it. Like, there's tons of great ways to have fun. So,
right. Yeah.
speaking of games, let's talk about your game. Let's delve into that a little bit. How did you get started with it?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've been like playing RPGs since like I was probably like 6 or 7, probably 83 or 84. And when I'm saying playing, that's pretty loose. We were basically like, um, just doing whatever we want, power gaming and like murder hobos and that sort of thing. And I mean, over time, that's been the consistent thing in my life. Was I grew up like I was pretty poor as a kid, and I didn't have we couldn't afford like my parents couldn't afford to buy me any books, so I started making games. One of my friends had the Marvel superheroes, the face rip role playing game as a kid, and he had it, and he had all this stuff for it, and he had these little cutouts for it that were like you would fold them, and they made like a three panel. It was like a 3 panel character or something that you could put on the map and stuff. And I wanted those, and my parents couldn't afford them. So what I did was like I just started making that stuff at a pretty young age, and because I couldn't afford the books, so I just started making the games and stuff. And nobody played them, man. It drove me crazy. Like I tried to get my brother to play them, I tried to get my parents to play them, and my friends. Nobody wanted to play them. Eventually, I got like the red box for Christmas, and a Redbox D&D, and I started playing that. So, and that's kind of, and like I said, like that's the consistent element in my life as far as creativity has gone, is that role-playing games and reading them and making them and playing them has always been there since I was, 6 or 7. And it's been the thing that like made me go to school and like study writing, and it's the thing that made me study art, and it's the thing that pulled all of these different elements together. It's role playing and gaming and D&D, I guess, at the core, because that's what I grew up with and stuff. So, and that's what led to Faraway Land, is that I had a bunch of characters. I used to draw like, Where's Waldo? And I used to draw these Where's Waldo things, but instead of like, it was a bunch of characters, like everyone was like murdering each other. So it was like stuff like people with machetes and swords, and plants eating people, and like people being impaled on things and like cut in half or whatever. And so what I did like several years ago is I went back through and I looked at a bunch of these characters, and I was like, and I'd been thinking for a long time to take a bunch of ideas that I'd had and like kind of put them into a singular universe where everything is connected in that universe. And I looked at those characters and I was like, kind of processing that and synthesizing that over several, I guess probably several months or several years. And eventually Faraway Land came out of that, where it's this planet that's the nexus point in this universe or this galaxy called the Materiosphere. And this place has been torn apart by war, and a war that was in the past, and it opened up these fissures and allowed other things to come into the planet and influence what was going on the planet. So you have all of these bizarre races and these creatures and all of this stuff. And that's pretty much how it evolved. It evolved from, just gaming for a couple decades, and then drawing like really violent Where's Waldo posters, and then wanting to create a singular vision of a fictional universe that I wanted to be able to expand on, kind of for the rest of my life. Like this is something I see myself doing regardless of like who's interested and that sort of thing. Like this is just something that I'm obsessed with, that I'm waking up in the morning thinking about, I'm going to bed thinking about. It's like a passion. And it's something that I see myself expanding on for as long as I can do that.
There's nothing wrong with art for art's sake, that is for sure. And the other thing with that too is whenever you do anything, everything requires time and effort and energy. So
yeah,
when we looked at what we're doing with Nerdarchy, if we weren't into it, if we didn't love doing what we do,
sure,
we'd never be able to continue with it 4 or 5 years down the road, because as far as jobs go, it's fairly thankless in the sense of financially, being able to support a family and stuff like that. So, and any endeavor, like when you're kind of like starting it up, from the beginning, I'm sure like we've talked earlier, you have a day job,
right.
So running a business in addition to that, it's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work, man. And I think that and this is something I've been very aware of, I think especially in this Kickstarter, because I've run I think this is our 5th or 6th Kickstarter that we've run. And one of the things that has really struck me is that even though Faraway Land's a pretty small game, it's been out for just a few years and stuff, I see people that are backing the Kickstarter, and I know that they're giving money, and that money came from, for most people, time spent doing some sort of work where they're generating income. And then they decide that, there's this thing that this guy made that I don't know who he is, and it's important enough to me that I'm going to spend money on it, and I'm going to back that project, and I'm going to say, I have enough faith in you, you're going to commit to it and finish it and send it to me and all of that. And I was telling my wife when I started thinking about that, it's a huge deal that you generate content in your imagination, you put it on paper, you put it on a monitor or whatever, and then you put it out there for people. And then people have spent like hours and minutes of their limited existence, which is like, I mean, your time is a non-renewable resource. And then they say, you know what, I'm going to give this person some money. I'm going to give them a piece of my time and a piece of my life in order for them to send me this work that they did. So, man, to me, that's like a huge, huge thing. And I'm very, and I try and be very aware of that, even though like, and I'm very aware that also that Faraway Lands a drop in an ocean of gaming. There are people that are giving me money for, you know, my creativity and these and my imagination, and I see them as giving me time, their parts of their lives. They've given it to me to help me bring something that they feel is important, and I think that's awesome.
Voltaire's Rewind.
Yeah,
Is the
right.
game a cohesive story or a mix of different concepts within that world?
What is that, Voltaire? What is it called?
Voltaire's Rewind is the person asking the question.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And
So,
is the game a cohesive story or a mix of different concepts within the world?
so there is a cohesive story to it, and I don't want to get into this too deep because I feel like it is a big story. It is a it's a huge story. It's like I'm looking at it on the level of something like Dune or just something that's massive that requires a lot of time. But it is a cohesive story. It's a singular story where there's a universe that's created. There's a planet. This planet undergoes this battle with these invaders from outer space, and these invaders fail to take over the planet. And in failing to do so, they rip open these fissures around the planet, and these fissures allow things from other times, other dimensions, to enter into the planet and to become part of this planet. Faraway Land is basically the core of this universe, and these new books begin to expand on that, uh, and later books that are already in the works will expand that further, where we leave Faraway Land and we go to other planets and we begin to explore this universe around there. So, but one of the parts of it, even though it is like this like structured story and that sort of thing, it's very open to what the players and what GMs want to do. And I really wanted to make it something where, you know what, here's this background, here's enough stuff that you can have, and I really want you to make it your own. I wanted it to feel like, oh, I'm opening this book for the first time, like as a 10-year-old, and I'm seeing the world through the eyes of a 10-year-old, uh, and I'm able to enter into a new world with those young kind of innocent eyes. I think of like listening to like the first time I heard Metallica's "Ride the Lightning," and it was like the fastest, craziest music I'd ever heard. And I don't ever remember hearing any music since then that was just as awesome to me as listening to Ride the Lightning. Um, so, and that's what I wanted. I wanted people to feel like that. I wanted to feel like that when I was looking at it. Like, oh man, I'm like a kid again. I almost dropped the F-bomb right there. I'm like a kid again. And this is what I want it to be, is something that's new, and it feels new, and it feels like, wow, I'm allowed to take this world that somebody gave me, and I'm allowed to make it my own thing. And that's kind of what I wanted it to be. So I don't know if that answers that question or not.
So, what would be the 5 minute elevator pitch for the game?
Yeah, that's super hard for me.
So,
uh,
what is
I guess
what are the core
yeah.
mechanics? Let's start there then.
Yeah, well, the 5 minute elevator pitch is like Faraway Land is this strange, quirky mix of science fiction, fantasy. It's basically like like the kitchen. It's a kitchen sink universe. Everything is thrown in there, sort of. And I guess like Rifts would be the closest equivalent that I could think of, as far as a gaming universe where it's this just multiverse of stuff. Um, So that would be like the 5 minute, like the 5 second pitch or whatever. But the core mechanic is the core conflict resolution is you roll a handful of six-sided dice, and then whatever your high roll is, you compare that roll to a target number or to an opposed roll. So, for example, and the way that you determine what your dice pool is, I guess, is you have stats. It's a 3-stat system. You have brute, which is like strength and power, dexterity, which is stuff like speed and agility, and then you have wits, which is like intelligence, wisdom, awareness, and that sort of thing. So, and then you have boons, and there's a limited list of boons, and I think there's 14 of them. And these things would be like really broad skill categories. And what you would do is you take your stat score and your boon score. So you have a brute score of 2, and you have a boon score of 3, say in like melee. And each boon is related to a specific stat. So like your ranged boon score, if you're using like ranged weapons like guns and bows and stuff like that, it would be tied to dexterity. So you add those two scores together, and that's what gives you your dice pool. And then you roll those dice, and whatever your high roll is the score that you have for that roll. And you compare that with your opponent's opposed roll or a target number.
Does the system have like a class? Is it class based, non-class based?
It's not class based. It's completely open, and basically you generate experience points, and the experience points allow you to buy upgrades, and that's how you upgrade your character. So in several of the books, there are like examples of like different NPCs and stuff, so you can kind of structure your character. So say you want to build a wizard or magic user that's like a necromancer, and you would purchase upgrades that would allow you to move into that area. Or say you wanted to be a a bard for whatever reason. Man, I don't know. I have this like strong hatred for bards and elves. But if you wanted to do that, like you buy upgrades that allow you, so you upgrade your boons, you upgrade your stats in certain areas, you upgrade abilities, you upgrade spells according to what you want your character to become. So it's very open, and character creation takes about 5 minutes, and your character can fit on an index card.
Your hatred for elves is obvious. It's their lack of facial hair.
Yeah, right, right, yeah. Man, this is off the topic, but like, have you ever watched the show *Halt and Catch Fire*?
I have not.
Okay, well, never mind. But like, one of the elves from like The Hobbit or something is the guy in there, and every time I see him, the actor's name is Lee Pace, and every time I see him, I'm like, man, that's that dude that was riding a reindeer. He's riding a reindeer in the I think it's in The Hobbit, one of the Hobbit movies. So, yeah.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. The elf he's riding the stag into battle.
He's riding stag. Yeah, it's not a reindeer. Yeah, yeah, right. So, but that's the core that's the core conflict resolution mechanic. Is you roll a handful of dice and compare that score to a target number or an opposed roll.
How many archetypes do you guys use for the examples?
There aren't any archetypes used for PC creation examples, and one of the
NPCs you mentioned, to me, that just, I've seen other systems that are similar and have archetypes. They just call them archetypes, and it's like, you want to build this character, this is kind of how you would do it.
Yeah, it doesn't really go into that specifically. I mean, there's a bunch of NPC, like different types of NPCs that I mentioned, that you can look at to kind of give you an overview of what your character could be, like what boons and what stats that you could have, and where you should kind of like focus on, like, are you good at making maps, or are you good at sword fighting or whatever. But there aren't any like specifics as to hey, if you want to make a fighter, or you want to make a ranger, or you want to make a druid, here's what you should do. That doesn't really exist in there. What does exist now, and one of the complaints early on with the first edition was there's only rules for creating human PCs, and people seem to think that like there should be, you know, I'd like to see more. So one of the things in these books is we've introduced like uh, about 35 or 40 different non-human uh, characters you could play or races that you could play. And most of these things are completely unique to Faraway Land. I mean, you have like elves and dwarves and besides that, most everything else is completely unique to Faraway Land.
So, what kind of stories are you guys telling in your games that you're playing?
So most of it's like, man, um, it's mostly sort of a bizarre like. Rarely are the games ever serious, and in fact, in the rules, there's like you get XP bonuses for doing hilarious stuff in game, and it's really like I'm not a serious gamer. I don't sit down and like look at rules and say, oh, okay, or whatever. Most of the game is built on like it's very open, it's very sandboxy. Most of the games that we play, it starts out, at least the games that I'm running, it starts out with like we're going in a specific direction, and generally that falls apart, and it turns into just this completely chaotic mess of people just doing whatever they want in game. And the crazier, the better. And I think the rules kind of lend themselves to really open gameplay styles where people can say, "Can I pull this off?" And I'm the type of GM that's like, well, if you can make an argument for this, like I'll let you do that and make a dice roll, and if it's successful, then you do it. And then another thing that's big in there, and I know this is really general as to like the gameplay, but I'm big on letting people narrate whatever it is they're doing. So when they get a kill, they get to narrate like what type of kill that is, or if they're performing like whatever action, it's all on them. Like I'm not narrating or describing what they're doing, what their character's doing, or what anybody around them is doing necessarily, as far as a reaction to their actions. Uh, they're the ones who are describing that sort of thing, and I think that's on me to a large degree, is the way that I kind of run a game.
So, I'm going to dive in the chat, just start pulling out some questions. There seems to be a few.
Yeah.
Sage Machensi, what is your favorite part of Faraway Land? What did you enjoy making most? What are your favorite race, creature, or character that you made?
Oh, uh, man, yeah. Thanks for asking. My favorite part of Faraway Land is figuring out the puzzle of making really elegant mechanics for the game. To kind of start with something that's overly complex and then like whittle it down until you get to the point where you have a very elegant rule system that you can learn in just a few minutes and pick up and play. And an example of that is in the Seas of Faraway Land. It's a new book that's in this Kickstarter, and working on ship combat was driving me insane, where I was like working on a ship and how do you treat individual players, PCs versus NPCs performing actions. And yeah, go ahead. Sorry. Oh, I thought you were going to ask something, Dave.
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. And so like figuring out, like to me, like figuring out mechanics for a game is like a puzzle. It's like working this puzzle that if you're making the puzzle that doesn't exist yet and putting all these pieces together. So I love doing that, and I love the world building element of it. Just kind of saying like, okay, I want to have people doing this. Like I want to have a whole race of like anthropomorphic mice that are addicted to cheese and like scared to death of cats, and I want to have people who are controlling spaceships by tapping into this song of the universe, and that's how they're able to steer spaceships through material space. And so I love all the elements of putting a game together. I love building the mechanics, and that's one of the reasons that I didn't use pre-existing mechanics. Like I guess I'm most familiar with stuff like D&D and like OSR stuff, and I know there would be a bigger market for it, and I just really wanted to make a simplified version of I wanted to make my own mechanics because I thought it would be really fun to figure that out. Until I was spent like a year and a half trying to figure out like naval combat mechanics, and it was driving me insane. Um,
I feel like things are trending that way where there is a lot of people that really do appreciate rules light and that style play. I personally, as I get older, the less complicated I want. Sometimes I look at games and I'm like, this just feels complicated for complicated sake. I'm not really interested in playing a simulation of the real world. I can just go outside my door and exist in the real world if I really want to.
yeah, yeah. I feel the same way. Like I think before we started, I mentioned Fatal. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but they have a stat in there for anal circumference. When, and I and every time I think of like complex mechanics, I always think of anal circumference now.
That's horrible. I've never actually looked at it. I've heard enough stories to make me never want to look at that game ever.
Yeah, I have a copy of it. I don't know where I got it from. I have a PDF version of it, and I don't know. There's parts of it that are pretty funny, but when your game gets like, for me, and this is like a personal preference, of course, when the game gets to the point where I need like stats for anal circumference, like I know that it's time to like begin to examine that area and say, what have I done here that went awry?
Yeah, we've definitely we've made a wrong turn somewheres. So
Yeah.
Pru has a question or statement maybe somewhere's in between there. The art
Okay.
cracks me up. It's a fresh take on RPG art for books. I love it. When did you settle on this distinct style?
So I do a lot of painting and a lot of like serious artwork actually, and I do everything in house, and like I do all the artwork, and I do everything for Faraway Land, and it's really hard to sit down and crank out like 500 or 600 pieces of art in a working amount of time when you're doing like complex or realistic art. And like I said before, I was drawing these Where's Waldo kind of esque posters. Actually, it was like Richard Scarry's Busy Town, where everybody was murdering each other, and it was very cartoony. And like I just found that I could sit for hours and draw these really like fluid kind of cartoony characters. If you look at like characters in Faraway Land, they don't have joints. Um, they look like their arms are bendable. Like these, I used to get these Easter rabbits that were like you could bend their arms and legs and shit. And my mom used to give them to me for Easter all the time. I don't know why. And so I wanted something that was really fluid looking, and I didn't want to do something that was serious. I want to do something that stands out also from the other stuff on the market. Like I look at like fifth edition, and I look at some of these books that come out now, and the artwork is absolutely beautiful. I mean, I absolutely love it. And I think that the guys and the ladies that make these pieces are just phenomenally talented. And but I also noticed that like when I look at that stuff, and then I look at somebody that like Errol Otis or one of these guys that you see in these old books, that stuff really sticks out in my mind because I mean, like Errol Otis, like has just this very specific style that doesn't look like anybody else. And one of the things I wanted to do is kind of make artwork for a game that fits the content of the game and fits the feeling of the game and the universe and the setting and all of that stuff, and at the same time to set it apart from sort of the other stuff that's on the market. All
So
my answers feel super long, man. Like, and I'm just like rambling and shit.
it's okay. No worries, man. We're here to talk. Nerditor Doug, he runs the website for us. Wants to know if the dice explode or not in those pools.
The dice, I guess the dice kind of explode. So if you roll multiple sixes, then each additional six counts as +1. So I guess it's not really like a traditional exploding die necessarily. I mean, you don't roll a six and then re-roll and add that or something. So if you roll like say, you roll 5 dice, and out of those 5 dice, you roll 3 sixes, you would take the 6 and then add the 2 additional dice as +1, and then you would so you would have a total roll of 8.
Okay, that makes sense. It's a different mechanic.
Yeah, it's a little different. And so in your role is compared with the opposed role. So let's say you're attacking and the opposed role is defending, and you roll an 8 and they roll a 6. You subtract the defense roll from the aggressor roll, and so you'd have a 2, and that would be your margin of success. And then that's like a bonus that you add to the damage of whatever the weapon does. So if you have like a short sword or something, it does 1d6. Uh, you would add that 2 to the 1d6, so you do 1d6 plus 2 damage.
So does that mean success and failure is on a gradient?
Um, it's on a gradient as far as like the bonus that you get. So no, you either pass or fail your roll. If you're successful with your roll, then you could get a bonus.
Gotcha.
But there's not really like a gradient of like, oh, you did okay, you did great, or you did exceptional, like that.
Okay, it's still pass fail.
Right.
Cool. Donovan wants to know: can you be tech based?
Tech based, as in like I guess a character. I guess he's referring to.
Yeah, character being technology based.
Yeah. So with the new books, you totally can. Farwayland like really does kind of like it is like the kitchen sink sort of setting where you have like a race of you have robots and like sapient constructs. Two of them from the original books are the 10 times 10 men, and then you have another group called the Soricon, which are like these big purple floating heads that like hate everything that's made of flesh and stuff. And in the new books, you can totally create. There's a part, and I don't remember if it's Creatures Volume 2 or Creatures Volume 3. I think it's Creatures Volume 3. It's called Constructonomicon, and it gives you a bunch of rules for building your own constructs and your own characters in there. And so there are a bunch of like tech-based characters in the game. Like one of the new creatures in there, and I think it's a playable. I think there's rules in there for non-human PCs. In the non-human PC section is the augmented, so you can have like sort of bionic cyborg sort of characters now, and that's something that's a little newer that wasn't in the original Tome of Awesome. And the Tome of Awesome is the core rule book.
I used to be like a purist in my earlier days of gaming, and like you don't mix things up, and now I'm like, put it all in a blender and see what you get.
Yeah.
I got bored of just playing straight fantasy for 20, 30 years, and I'm like, I need something else. I even got bored of reading that stuff, and I started like moving into like steampunk and alternate history and stuff. So Zach wants to know: tree-based upgrade system or anything goes?
It's not really a tree-based upgrade system. You get to spend XP that you accumulate, and then you can buy specific upgrades with that XP. So I have to look it up specifically as to what like you can get with the XP. But like say that you want to increase one of your boons, which is like a skill. So you would spend XP, and I think it's like your current boon score multiplied by 5 XP. Or say you want to increase like a flaw, because you can have flaws and boons, and flaws are things that are like negatives for your character, things that impair or just impair your character. So like to increase a flaw, I think if you want to increase your flaw, and flaws can be from -1 to -3, you can increase a flaw, and I think it costs like 5 XP to do that. Also, every time you level up, you gain an additional hit point, you gain an extra luck point, you gain more, you gain another action every 5th level, I believe. And then every level that you level up, you gain +1 severe damage. And the combat in Farwayland's pretty damn brutal, man. Like it's tough to power game. Like you're not going to be taking on dragons solo. I mean, I guess you can, like you can make it however you want, but you don't get a huge like HP upgrade every level. Like death is one of the things that I always wanted to be on the line. And there's rules to circumvent that, like battle scars, where if death is on the line, you can choose to forego death and take a permanent scar. And that scar can be something emotional or mental or physical. So you could lose an arm or whatever.
I think the emotional thing is funny.
Me too.
All right, show us on the dial. Where did the dragon touch you?
Yeah, I keep thinking about that, and it's like I may not think that was that funny if I had like emotional pain in my own life, but
Yeah, I guess.
yeah,
I, I don't know. I think I have plenty of emotional pain in my real life, and I tend to just make fun of and laugh at that
yeah,
stuff.
okay, yeah. But I think I think one of the things with like designing mechanics is that like it should be balanced. So if it's super deadly, I think that players should have the option also to kind of stave off death, but you still suffer a penalty in doing so. And I also think it's really funny to have like really maimed, broken cartoon characters.
You mentioned luck points. What's that about?
Yeah, so luck lets you like you can re-roll dice and stuff like that. You can use it in a couple different ways, but it lets you like re-roll a die. If you have a terrible roll, you can spend a luck point and re-roll that.
Okay, so just a way to influence what has happened. Donovan wants to know: is there mounts or vehicles in the world for travel?
Yeah. Hey. Yeah. Thanks, Donovan. There are mounts. There's weird mounts. There's no horses. There's like things like cow steeds and killipedes, which is like a big centipede that you can ride around on, and like there's I mean, in the new books, there's like over 300 new creature entries, and there's a bunch of mounts in there. And then vehicle rules. One of the things that took so long that I mentioned before to work out naval combat was to create a universal vehicle system where all vehicle rules that would appear in future books would be in line with how naval combat worked. So um, and Seas of Faraway Land is the first book that introduces like vehicle combat with a focus on naval battles. So space battles and regular sea battles sort of work the same. And these books don't have space battles right now. There's another book in the works called Adventures in the Materiosphere, which looks at like it goes out into space and stuff. Uh, but yeah, mounts and vehicles both have rules, and they're very similar to the core mechanic. It's just basically an extension of the hub of that basic conflict resolution system.
Now, the Mighty Hob has a pretty good question here.
Yeah.
What sort of tools does your game give the GM to help them more easily make adventures and custom material, monster construction tools, treasure generation, etc.?
Right. So Uh, man, there's a ton of stuff in the Tome of Awesome. There's a whole section on generating adventure ideas with the overall like basic like what is the hook, and then like specific adventure ideas and the way that you could use those hooks, or the ways that you could use those ideas with specific hooks. Um, in the Tome of Awesome, there's a treasure generator, and then in one of the new books, I'm not sure if it's Creatures Volume 2 or 3. I keep getting them mixed up. There's an extensive treasure generation system in there where it's not just generating like gold pieces and silver pieces and that sort of thing. It's generating uh, pretty much everything that you can think of, from items to weapons to like tiny statues to how rare it is to the quality of the item and that sort of thing. And it's all handled in a very simple way. I think there's a ton of GM tools in all of these books that are really kind of focused on like, here's an idea of how you can do this. Here's an idea of how you can implement constructs into the game. Or here's an idea of how you can take treasure and put a new spin on it to where it's not just you found 50 gold pieces. I always thought it was absurd to find 50 gold pieces in a dungeon, or that there's like a goblin or kobolds are like hoarding like copper pieces or something like. So it's really kind of geared more toward like a more abstract, not abstract, but a more kind of, I guess, specific type of treasure that has a value to it as opposed to like coinage. Um,
I have a question for you. How long have you been working on Faraway Land?
so the first Kickstarter I did was in 2004, and actual work on the game started in like I think mid 2002. So for that first Tome of Awesome, I think as far as the world goes, I think it was about a year and a half of initial work, and then in the last 4 years, uh, I've been putting together the revised Tome of Awesome, and then like the new books that have come out. Yeah.
So have you gotten so having been around for that, like you must have built up some kind of community around the game by now, especially if you're still going. So, what kind of stories and feedback are you getting from people playing in the game?
So a lot of the feedback has been from people introducing their kids to the game. Even though the combat element's pretty brutal and Faraway Land's pretty deadly and everything, the kind of cartoonish aspect of the game kind of leads to being more kid-centric. Um, we've really taken great care in editing the text of the game to pull out specific words. Dave, you and I were talking about this before, with words like replacing words like torture with torment, and replacing words like brothel with not replacing it with anything, just removing that idea completely from the book, and just kind of like curtailing the language that's used in the book to be more kid centric, and also being very aware that, like, there's like there are kids out there that like suffer from whatever, like they may have emotional issues or they may be bullied and stuff like that, and to just be very aware of that sort of thing in the language that's used in the book. So.
Is that kind of like an unexpected consequence of curating the game?
I think so, because, oh yeah, and to answer your question before, and I think part of that is because a lot of the feedback that I've gotten on the game has been from people in different parts of the world who have used the game in school and classes and with their kids and stuff. And I don't want to be like, if I'm putting something out there into the world, and like, and again, this is just me. If I'm putting something out there, I want it to have some sort of positive impact. And I want some kid to be able to pick it up and say, wow, this is like something that like I love, and like that's stoking my imagination. Like my imagination was like, stoked when I was 10 years old when I picked up the Red Box and I was reading like the words that like somebody like Gary Gygax wrote or something like that. I want some kid to be able to carry it with them until they're my age and they say, wow, you know what, I want to do something with this. And like, I want to use this as the stepping stone of where I'm going to bring it to this next level. And so, yeah, the game, I mean, originally I was like, man, I want super violent cartoon characters that murder each other. And like, I want everybody to be hateful and stuff like that. And it just kind of organically grew in a direction where I wanted it to be more universal in its appeal, and especially in bringing in new gamers, and not turning them off or turning their parents off. And with that being said, though, a large number of the people that I've gotten feedback on from the game are all old school, like OSR gamers. They're the ones who are really kind of like promoted this. They're the ones who back these projects. They're the ones who have participated in feedback and stuff on the game. And so it's a weird kind of like demographic there. You have like people that are playing it with their kids and they're making Lego characters and they're playing it in school and stuff. And then you have like these dudes that are like 50 years old.
Well, from the description of the rule set, it does sound like it is very kid friendly, in the sense that, what's your score? Okay, well, here's 3d6. What's relevant to that? Oh, here's another 2d6. Roll these. No Thank You Evil kind of uses like chits to, and so like you have pools that you will use to do things and pay for things. So by giving a kid or a child, a pile of chits they actually have to spend and give to you, and it helps it. But you can do using D6s kind of does the same thing. So I imagine that would make it very child friendly. The art has a lot of appeal, and I find it interesting too that how the unintended consequence of developing the game that you wanted to play and an art style you really enjoyed, and then the audience kind of picked you, and then and reciprocal to that, you're like, oh well, these are the people playing the game, so I should make it geared towards them.
Yeah, you know what? To some degree, I think, and I don't want it to seem like anytime somebody gives me a piece of feedback, I'm like, oh, holy shit, I need to change everything in the game. I think definitely one of the things that I did was on the Google Plus community, was I asked people like, what do you want to see like in new books? What is stuff that you want in these? And I looked through there and like I used that as the feedback that kind of directed me in what I was creating. When people were saying, you know what, we want non-human PCs and we want rules for them and uh, we want creature size comparison silhouettes and we want you know, loot drops and things like that. I decided that, you know what, like these are people that are interested in playing this, and I think these are good ideas. I mean, if somebody has a terrible idea that's like you should have a whole book about generating brothels, like I didn't put that in there,
Yeah.
but for the most part, like when people had good ideas and they were giving me feedback, and they were able to like provide some sort of context or reference for that feedback, or if it was something that we'd experienced in our own group and or playing, it was definitely stuff that I was like, well, this needs to be in here. This is something that is interesting and should be in the game. So, you know, I look at it as like this kind of cumulative cultural knowledge thing for me, where I'm pulling from all these people who came before. I'm taking these ideas from things like 80s cartoons and early RPGs of the 80s and 90s and movies, and it's all getting funneled and synthesized into this thing called Faraway Land. And other people's feedback when we play, and this would be awesome if you could do this, all of that gets funneled into there as well. And it becomes this new thing. It's basically, there's a term called palimpsest, which is the it was on papyrus. When they would rewrite over papyrus, you would see the old writing move up through the new writing, and that's what I look at like kind of contemporary creative work is something like Faraway Land, where it pulls from all of these things and makes it something new. Palimpsest.
So we have a couple questions in the chat. TrueMate, what's the most expensive upgrade option?
Um, I don't know what the right off the top of my head. I'm not sure. Let me see if I can find it, and I'll tell you. Um, they're not like super expensive. Like one of the most expensive would be raising a stat, and it would be whatever your current stat is. I think you would have to multiply it by like 10 XP or something like that. And generally, like from a session, you would get like 5 or 10 XP. So.
So it'll take a while. So Prue Prue has another question. What inspires you and what keeps you going through the parts of the process that you enjoy the least, even loathe maybe?
Yeah. So what I loathe in the process is the business side of it. Like what I wish I could do is make a bunch of books and just give them to everybody. Like my goal is to like get people to be exposed to it and to play it. I hate dealing with money and I hate dealing with the money aspect of it. I really do. I despise it. I despise like what it does to people, the way it makes people angry, the way it makes people feel and stuff like that. Uh, so I dislike the business element of it. I also dislike I hate I hate having to revise once I've already made multiple revisions over something that I've done that's stupid. Like, uh, what would be an example? So I changed like a core mechanic just a little bit, and then I have to go through the entire thing and fix that in all places. Or making a small change that needs to be changed on every page. It drives me crazy because it's such tedious work. So the tedium of the non-creative elements of creating a game is what I dislike, and the business elements. All the creative part of it's fun as hell though, like the play testing and like, hey, what about this rule? Let's try this out, or I'll implement it, and I love doing that, and I love doing the artwork, and like I love talking to people about that, like what would this be, and what would be cool if we did this here, and that sort of thing. So uh, there's very little of it that I dislike as far as game creation goes. It's mostly in the back end as far as like the polishing of the game or the polishing of the text and then the business elements of it.
So Aaron Parks has a question, maybe joining us late. I'll just answer it because he asked if the mechanics are GLD&D or something new. It's something new. It's its own creation, its own rule set. Do you have any? Do you have a favorite story from your table or that someone submitted to you?
Um, You know, we several months back we had a lot of stuff going on with people shrinking and growing, uh, and just this thing getting out of hand. People like getting inside a Soricon and then like growing and then like crushing themselves inside it and then fusing with it and becoming like this new thing where their consciousness fused with the Soricon's consciousness, and instead of killing their character, they just became a new character. And honestly, there's nothing in the rules for playing something like that. We were just like, this would be awesome. And then them having to go through all kinds of like emotional trauma and like not having a body anymore and that sort of thing. Like I said before, like the adventures tend to get really kind of gonzo and just go down whatever rabbit hole they go down. Like, I don't care. And like, if players' characters get killed off, makes no difference to me. I don't try and kill player characters, of course, but if they do, we try and have something in place to where, you know what, like you have a character and he has like 50 brothers and sisters, so that every time one of them dies, then the brother or sister comes back to avenge their sibling's death. And stuff like that. Stuff like that is like is some of the highlights that we've had here recently.
So, what do you call the person that runs the game?
Just the GM.
Are you usually the GM or a player, or you get to share the responsibilities?
I usually GM, and I don't feel like I'm a great GM. Actually, I prefer to be a player most of the time. And I've very rarely been a player in Faraway Land. But I prefer to play, actually, as opposed to GM.
You're kind of boned. It's your game. They expect you to run it.
Yeah, totally. And that is the thing, and it's something I do enjoy it. But I think that I don't know. I guess it's the game too, you know. And when I've played Faraway Land as a player, it's been fun, and I've really enjoyed it, and I've really enjoyed running as a GM too. So either way, like, but I prefer playing most of the time.
Do you feel that Faraway Land allows you to do things that you can't do maybe in other RPGs?
I don't know. No, I think that like you can take any. I think you can take any rule system and create any story that you want from it if you're imaginative about it and if you have a good group of players. I think that you can take Fatal. I know I keep coming back to it, but
it's like a train wreck you can't look away from.
I know, there's bodies everywhere. And the coroners examining all their anal circumferences.
Well, someone did ask, is that tied to your charisma or con?
That's awesome. You mean anal circumference?
Yeah.
No, that's definitely charisma. I forget what the question was. What were we talking about?
I have no idea. Role-playing games, RPGs.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I guess like what I always think about when I see a new game or someone asks me how to do a specific thing with a game, like we always get the question, how do I play Star Wars with 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons? I'm like, why would you? They have this other game called Star Wars. They've made several iterations of it. Why don't you just go play that? Or
yeah, right.
Or like I've never felt like the need to go out and create my own game, and I've seen other people do it, and I guess, well, you know, what made you decide to do that? And like, or why are you doing this certain way? And when the response is like, just to be different, I'm kind of like, you know, why bother? But that being said, other people do come and like yourself come along and do create something different and creative and a lot of fun. But when I look at it, I'm like, I would probably just use something that's already out there.
Yeah, and you know, and I think that, like I said, like I think that every system out there that it has like qualities to it. If you have a good group and you have an imaginative GM and good players, smart players and imaginative players, that you're going to be able to kind of, with a little house ruling and like doing some work on your own, to be able to come up with like something to where you can play whatever you want. If you want to take 5th edition rules and play Star Wars, somebody out there is doing that already. And I think that like I think there's also been a lot of feedback is like, well, Faraway Land looks like a cool game. It looks like something that I would never play. Like that's been a lot of feedback that we've got. And I mean, I don't know. Like I think one of the things that it does is it creates a unique setting. And I think the rules are elegant. I think they're streamlined. I think they're quick to pick up and play. And they have a lot of optional elements to them to where you can expand on those. So you can make it more complex if you want it to be more complex. Or you can keep it really simple and you can give it to kids uh, and they can pick it up and play it. And you know what? If their character dies in the first 10 minutes of the game, uh, it takes just a few minutes to come up with another character and then they get right back in the game. So I think there's some unique qualities to it that, and I don't want to say that other games don't do this because I think at this point, after I mean, how long have people been making tabletop role playing games now? 45 years or 50 years almost. Uh,
It's
I
got.
think.
We just celebrated the 50th for Gen Con last year, so we have to be above 50 now.
Yeah. So I think it's really hard to say like, oh, this game is just doing something that no other game has ever done before. I think I think it synthesizes and pulls in a bunch of stuff from a bunch of nostalgia, and it creates like an emotional tether with certain people, and it pulls in this new artwork, and it pulls in a very unique setting with very elegant game mechanics that function more as a sort of a gestalt as opposed to just elements on their own. And I think that's where the novelty in the game comes from, is from all of these elements working together. It's like Constructonomic, or what are they called? The Constructicons that form Devastator. Um, yeah, it merges to form one giant evil robot, which is Faraway Land.
So you said your appeal seems to be with you're getting feedback from parents with kids and the OSR crowd.
Yeah.
Were you targeting the OSR crowd when you decided to do this, or you're like, this is my thing, I'm going to throw the spaghetti against the wall and see what happens?
No, man. Like that wall that the spaghetti was getting thrown against was, hey, I wrote this role playing game, and then I talked about it on Facebook, and so there was no specific crowd. Like I wasn't directing it toward a certain demographic when I made it. The demographic that I was making it for were people like me. There were people that grew up in the 80s that played RPGs in the 80s, that watched cartoons, listened to the music and the movies of the 80s. Because there's a lot of pop culture stuff, Easter eggs and stuff thrown into Faraway Land. And that's what it's for. It's really for people. That's what I designed it for. And really, even with the feedback and even with all the other stuff that I get, all the other influence and stuff, it really comes down to, do I think this is a cool idea? Do I like the way this looks? Do I like the way this sounds? Does this fit my overall vision of what I want this like expanded universe to be? And if it fits that sort of thing, then I'm all for it. And if it doesn't, then it doesn't really have a place in there.
So how much does knowing that where your appeal is, how much does that affect your design going forward? Do you kind of fish around in those communities to see what they're into and what they like to kind of get for inspiration?
Not really at all. I mean, it affects it on the level that I was talking about before, like specific language, so that it doesn't deter certain groups of people from playing. But as far as the content of the game, no, I don't. I'm not interested really in, oh wow, the OSR community. Like a lot of the stuff that I follow in there is like swords and wizardry, and I'm not interested in like that necessarily being a major influence. The major influence is stuff that I experienced from the time that I was like 7 till I was probably like 12 years old. That's the major influence, and that's still the thing that's influencing, because that's a dynamo, man. That thing just keeps spinning as long as my brain's working. That dynamo keeps spinning to influence, and that's where it's coming from. So no, really, very little influence from what's going on out there in the market today, actually.
There's nothing wrong with that. You're doing your thing and people are digging it. That's the important part.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it makes me happy. I'm glad that people pick it up and like send me pictures of their kids playing and stuff. It's a pretty nice thing.
Yeah, you guys have crushed your goal over on Kickstarter, so
Yeah.
it's going ahead. Uh, and there's been like a decent amount of time between you did your first one and this one. So what prompted you to dive back in?
Well, in the interim period, we did Kickstarters for like these decks of cards for generating dungeons called Dungeon Architect cards and World Architect cards. And then last year we were working on an app for Android for generating dungeons, and it's like a GM helper. It's called RPG World Builder. So there were multiple projects going on, and also during this time I was working on these new books. It was just there was a lot of stuff for me to get through as far as like what's the overall story of this universe going to be, and then on top of that, um, how do I how do I finally figure out what all of the base mechanics for the game are? And it sounds really simple, like, oh, come up with some like vehicle mechanics, but I wanted it to be something that was like if you're in a jeep or you're in a tank or you're on a sailing ship or you're in a dreadnought in the middle of space, all of these mechanics function at the same way. And it just took a long time, to do all of that. Plus, it took a long time to do all the artwork. Even though I draw pretty quick, there's a lot of artwork in these books, and it just takes a long time to do that.
Is that one of the highlights or one of the aspects that you enjoy maybe more than some others is doing the art?
Yeah, that's my. I love doing that, man. That's my original area of study, I guess. Is like I learned to. My dad showed me how to draw and paint and mix paint and learn color and perspective when I was a kid. Like I knew that stuff before I was reading. And plus, when I'm drawing and coloring and laying things out, I can do other stuff like listen to audio books and watch movies and stuff. I can't do that shit when I'm writing. It's impossible. So I like the drawing and the artwork because I can multitask and like I'm doing all kinds of stuff simultaneously.
Yeah, I only ask because it just looks like it's fun to do.
Yeah, it really is. And there are no rules. It's like, you know what? If something's not to scale, like I don't care. I'll just like make something up. And then like later on, like from the original Tome of Awesome, there were all these like creatures in there that had no they were just like this random stuff that I drew. And in these new books, I went back through and I defined all of those things. So you have these weird things that now have stats associated with them and personalities and all of this stuff. So sometimes the writing influences the artwork, and sometimes the artwork influences the writing. Uh,
Do you have
but
a
it,
favorite critter you've drawn?
oh yeah, somebody asked that earlier. I think I like the knock. There's a race of clones called knockmill, which are like Abraham Lincoln clones, and they wield axes and they have a hive mind. Um, I have there's a group of a creature called Ozotum, which are these like entertainers from an alternate Earth, and they look like Elvis Presley's, and they wear jumpsuits, and they have these symbiotes that live in them called Filiculum. Uh, so some stuff like things like that are like I think the more playful, the more bizarre stuff is the stuff that gets away from fantasy more is the stuff that I like drawing more.
That that's great. I'm loving the the Elvis Presley and Abraham Lincoln. That stuff's hilarious to me. Well, we are
Yeah,
just past the hour mark, and with that, I want to thank you for coming on. Hey guys, if you're watching on YouTube or somewhere else, we always put the links in the description over on YouTube, so you can check out Faraway Land, check out the Kickstarter, check out the website and the Facebook page. So I did show Dirk some love over there. And like I said, the art is fantastic. It looks like a lot of fun. I love the simplicity of the mechanics. I'm a big fan of that, so it sounds great. I'm gonna definitely have to check this out. And thanks for coming on, and thanks everyone for watching.
yeah. Thank you, Dave. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Oh, thanks, Mike, for the super chat. We appreciate that as always. And with that, until next time, guys, stay nerdy.